Look great. It's very nice to meet you, by the way.
Nice to meet you as well.
Yeah. So I did a mad dash to get these up here. So
no worries.
We're talking about here. So they should open. Let's see if we got them. Yeah.
Oh, that one's not mine. I don't know who's that.
It was just the ones that you put in the Skype chat. So.
I don't know who that is, but.
Here. Let's see.
It looks cool.
Yeah, it was one of the ones that you posted there, or maybe it was someone else. Okay.
I think it was.
But okay.
All right, there you go.
Yeah. Now that I recognize.
Now that's actually two files. So the second half is where all the actual Thunderbolts calculations are. This half covers the natives and the asymmetric glyph, which is something that we should definitely go over because it's an important glyph.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Welcome to the January 27th edition of the Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have Dave, Jim, Heather, Buddy, Eugene, Richard, Edwin, Robert, and our special guest, Ramon Careaga. We are speaking on the ancient myths and catastrophes, and the monuments, petroglyphs, and other evidence that show what the ancients saw in the skies. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.
The asymmetry is what gives it away that the diffusionists might have it wrong. Although, fair note, I am part of the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association, so I get into all that Welsh, Arthurian stuff, Vikings in North America, all that. I'm not an expert. Okay. I'm not an expert by any scope, and if you guys ever want one, I can find you one. But
I'm not an expert, but I'm Norwegian. So.
But the Alwyn glyph in this case is asymmetrical, and that is what is absolutely key for our electrical universe model. So I think that's what really got me going. I'm sure. Who's interviewing me, Neil?
We kind of do it as a collective, but if you'd like to have just one person, that would be fun.
No. I just wanted to see if anybody was planning on asking me.
We kind of all join in, and if you're comfortable with that, it's more of kind of a just informal conversation.
I am totally
kind of Socratic kind of thing. We find it fun, but it can be a little chaotic too. So it's treated kind of like it has like just kind of just very informal. What's the right word? Party-ish kind of nature to it.
Sure.
Yeah, like a talk in a bar or something.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Is that Eugene?
Yeah, it's me.
Hey. I'm glad that we connected there on ResearchGate. I was beginning to think you didn't ever use it anymore. But I wanted to tell you that I also agree Henri Poincaré is super awesome.
Oh yeah.
I agree with
he's
that.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, I read his books and they're very cool.
Yeah, that's a man who unfortunately died too young. Things might have turned out very differently if he hadn't. So it's super unfortunate that he died so young. But anyways, did anybody have any questions about what I do for a living and how it relates, or any kind of questions about the Chinese sciences or anything that they wanted to?
Yeah, I think it would be great if you could give like a quick overview of your interests and your background and what you'd like us to know, about your,
Sure.
It's clear you have a passion for all this stuff, and that's really exciting for us to
right.
To
well, I did get a bachelor's in electrical engineering, but I did not go through and get a master's and everything. And the reason I got into electrical and computer engineering, I actually wanted to be a computer engineer. So the funny thing is, back then I found analog and signals and power. I found it all really boring. But then I became kind of disillusioned by the computer engineering field, and I started to realize that some of my goals might not actually be good for humanity. So I've kept those inventions kind of in the back of my brain. Just the way the internet's going, I'm not sure that the world is ready for some of those ideas. So I had gotten also into martial arts, and that's what led me down the path of discovering Qi. The first time that I got flicked in the eyeball from across the room twice, I knew that there was something more going on than what I could see. At that time, I was pretty much still atheist and pretty much still a materialist reductionist kind of person. But I had shied out of Western philosophy when I started thinking about all that had happened in Europe's history and how it might be connected. So I started looking into the East, and I had read the Tao of Physics, and again, I was studying Shaolin and Tai Chi, and at one point I had to decide what I was going to do. So I turned in my top secret classification and decided I was going to become a master of martial arts, and I was going to teach it for a living. And then some things happened here in my hometown, and I decided that I wanted to pursue a different career. I took about 2 months, and I tried to figure out what I was going to do. So I was either going to get my clearance again and do Secret Service, or I was going to be an engineer in Alaska, or I was going to go ahead and go down this path of kind of mysticism and wizardry, but I wanted to be paid well for it. So I talked to a guy, and he convinced me that acupuncture was a good field. And so I went to the top school at the time, and maybe they're still the top school at Pacific College in San Diego. It's a 4.5-year program, and I killed it. It wasn't hard at all, but it was very expensive, and there are a lot of people who still haven't really made their mark in acupuncture. And for a while, my interest was in creating a franchise, but there are some real difficulties in that endeavor, doing it without venture capital. So I was doing also simultaneously as kind of, how would you say, visceral therapy. I had started the Hidden Kentucky Project. And if you want to see what that is, pull up hiddendestinationsky.com.
Are you sure you should be revealing this? Because it's supposed to be hidden.
No, it's
okay.
Fine. Hidden Destinations KY.
Okay.
KY.
KY map. Yeah, there it is. So, yeah, that one. And so when I was driving around, discovering all these places and cataloging them and mapping them, the idea here being that people don't know anything about Kentucky. They really just know bourbon, basketball, and horses, and that's all they know.
No, they should base a Fallout game there. Then we'll know all about it.
Yeah. And pretty soon I started discovering things, and I got into the Indian section, especially when I reached out to Dr. Ken Tankersley, and he literally, he was going to meet with me, and then he dumped me, which is fine, I thought he might have wanted a byline, and might have been why he wanted to meet in the first place. But then, when he figured out I was an ignorant pleb who hadn't crossed the academic threshold and realized how much they were hiding from everyone, he dumped me. So that only did what? That incited me to go and find everything that they want to keep secret. And in Kentucky, we have more than 24,000 archaeological sites that are not hidden. They're not available to the public. I have literally signed another top secret to talk with the web museum. The web museum. I had to, to agree to things. They in fact, I have the president of the AKHA. He was a professor at the University of Kentucky, and they won't let him in. And so I was able to get in, and I've looked at some of the documents, and I know where a lot of the different things are. But I'll tell you what happened. I was watching all those Dave Talbot videos, and I'm a very skeptical person, so I don't just jump in without any evidence. And so our assertion is that these glyphs are all over the world. So I said, let's see it. So I went over the shelf here in the clinic, and I picked up Rock Art of Kentucky. And what do you think I found? Plasma glyphs all throughout that book. And then secondly, I started to look at the asymmetric glyph, and I started to notice the asymmetry. And that asymmetry led me to the profound realization that Houston, we have a problem here. And when I looked at the Great Serpent Mound, I was like, oh, this is clearly Venus. There's a bow shock in front of the egg. And we also don't have, in the eastern United States, we don't have any major egg-eating serpents. So when you have 30 serpent mounds, and it's not a powerful, the rat snake is not a power animal. So when you have that many serpent mounds that have been destroyed and hidden, and just only the public only knows about the one, we also have more problems. And
I only knew about one.
Yeah, so I started digging into them. Now, once I started writing that paper, the plasma glyphs, I got quickly lost because I had all the different electric universe stuff going on in my brain. So I had to write about 7 papers just to have things that I could cite for this paper. And it became really obvious that there was more going on. Then last year, it exploded big time. I mean, finding constellation-aligned pyramids. I found the Thunderbolt strike site. In fact, if you go from where you are, I think it's further. It might have been further up, actually.
Okay.
Go back.
There are plenty of evidence for strikes in here. I can see them just by looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So those ones are that's it. So look at right here. So these two that you're looking at are actual astrobleams. One is Middlesbrough, which is the only city within a crater that I'm aware of in the world, and it leads right to the Cumberland Gap.
There's actually a couple, but don't worry about
it. There might be, but it's the only one that I know of. So the Cumberland Gap is the discharge going to the right, and then you have blast back, and then you have a clear bow shock. And then on the right, you have Jephtha Knob. Same thing in Kentucky. Now, the one that's below, they didn't know what to do with. When I started looking into the Big Sink, they didn't know. There was an argument as to whether it was an impact site or an astrobleam. I'm sorry, a karst formation. They didn't honestly know, so they assigned it. But I mean, I've analyzed it, and you don't see any bow shocks. And now, when I wrote this paper, I did not have that Pratt paper with the solar flaring, and so I pulled open that paper recently, and I was talking about 56 rays, and that's when I went in and counted, and there are about 56 craters there, and in particular, the one it's a little bit left of the right edge is actually a crater with a crater rim discharge when you zoom in on it. And it is about the same size as the Mount Horeb mound in Lexington. And what's interesting is the Mount Horeb mound is older than Chillicothe and Newark. The Mount Horeb Adena site is a huge earthwork that's been mostly destroyed. The university owns it. I'm going to be doing some EMF measurements on it pretty soon because the preliminary ones definitely showed activity. But it is a
that blows my mind, by the way.
That there's still activity?
That they would destroy it.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the problem. Kentucky is not like Ohio. In Kentucky, there's been a tradition of raping the resources here, and now what I call it is the muck of history. The layers here are so thick that people don't know the first thing about Kentucky. They don't know that we had the first commercial vineyard. They don't know that we had, massive covered bridges, engineering projects that were the marvels of the world here in Kentucky. Because as people moved west, once they had destroyed the natural scape here, it didn't matter if we had, Springs histories and major presidents and the first vertebrate archaeology. And I mean, Thomas Jefferson himself took a particular interest. And that's why I start this paper with his discussion with the Delaware chief. That came out of Ken Tankersley's book, In Search of Ice Age Americans. And they tell him straight up that because he asks, what happened to the mammoths and mastodons of the big lick? And they said that thunderbolts came and killed them all, except for one who went and ran north and crossed across the big rivers up there and is living to this day. So, and here's the other thing. It said that the great man sat on his mountain and with the stamp of his foot. So that tells us that there were definitely earthquakes, and it tells us that there was some formation large enough to call him the great man. And
we know who that is. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but what kind of scales are we looking at here? Like, what is the size of this crater?
Well, that one's about a mile across. The diameter of it is almost a mile across. Now, the crater at Mount Horeb, which is about 23 kilometers northeast, and then its crater rim discharge hole, the Sea Hinge Mound. Is everybody familiar with the Sea Hinge Mounds, like from Ireland and England?
We were just talking about Sea Hinge.
Right. So the Sea Hinge Mounds, my hypothesis on those is that after there would be a discharge and a burning, they interpreted that as a welcome entrance. And they utilized it dually. Number one, the bridge forming the cosmic pole, and then the center mound, which would have been left from the electrical carving, forming the Aten or Ra in his womb. So you had the mound rim, and you had now an entryway. And that's why there's no burials inside of these C-hinge mounds, because they were places that
they were taking of different things, these mounds, because we're actually talking about C-hinge, the one with the tree that was jutting up through the middle of the circle. It's like a Stonehenge, but with a tree up the middle.
Well, and again, Stonehenge is another example of the same idea. You have a hinge with a pathway or an entranceway and where they're going. But the way I'm looking at it is that this is one of the rays actually scooting off to the side and then burning a hole real quick. Who knows, matter of minutes, but those are typically about 100 foot. So in this paper, remember I wrote this paper before I had his paper. I didn't have Peratt's other paper. I only had his first paper for about the plasma glyphs. So I wasn't analyzing this site, and I also don't have perfect access because this is all horse farms, private land. So I was instead looking at Mount Horeb, and it is about 100 feet wide, or I guess you'd say roughly 30 to 40 meters. Mm-hmm. And so I started using that as my model. If we're looking at how much power can we create, then I started thinking about how to get an arc discharge. Now, the reason that I chose the moon was that I wanted some type of body that I could actually say, hey, there's some body near us, what would it take? And I started doing calculations based on that. Cool. Once I reached out to Michael, he said, well, classical isn't going to work for that. So I started looking into all sorts of papers, and I realized the atmospheric, we don't understand atmospheric conductivity very well. In fact, in some places, some layers of the atmosphere, conductivity will go down, and in other places it will go up.
Yep.
So the model there becomes very difficult without computer simulations, and I don't have access to the tools that Peratt has.
I don't think you could do it with computer simulations, actually.
Probably not at this point.
No, well, it's just plasma. You can determine certain things, you just can't predict exactly. So. Right,
and the goal of this paper, I want to make really clear. I have an entire table of all the assumptions that I put into the papers. Aside from that, we're using the single strike, and that it's a single pulse, and it's not one of these big 56 ray discharge. It's just a single discharge, like basically a single beam that is acting like a lightning bolt. And I decided to say, I don't know. I don't know for sure, but here are the things that I can tell you. There are problems with these different. So you can look right there, the Hudson Bay craters. If you go back up, they have center bullseye cratering that is exceeding in many places the height of the rim. Whereas if you look at the well-known dinosaur killing crater here, if you scroll down,
you should put your fingers up for bunny rabbit ears on that when you say dinosaur killing. But go on.
Right, of course. I mean,
it's okay.
Millions of years, but we pretty much know that is an actual impact site. So the West is conflating these two, and so a huge part of this paper is just in separating those, and so I looked at the Carolina Bays and I looked at these different craters, but that was only a part of what was going on. What was really going on is I wanted to validate the natives' testimony, because the natives' testimony reflects the Sumerian testimony, and both North and South America are reflecting something. My interest in the moon came from Graham Hancock's. He has a couple of interesting quotes from some tribes in South America that made it pretty clear that the moon had come too close at some point, and that matched the Enuma Elish. And so I used the moon, but for the actual calculations, I decided to not use a spherical. I decided to use 100 foot by 100 foot plane, and the reasoning for that is that that's about the same size as the crater at Mount Horeb. So once I reached out to Michael Claridge, it kind of put my paper on back hold, because he was like, "This isn't going to work for what you want to do." I'm like, "Well, how can I do it?" He says, "Well, I don't know." So I was, I don't know, how did I break through that? I was researching around, and I found a plasma physicist, Dr. Don Gurnett. And I had already written these other papers that I mentioned. I had to write on the origins of religions. I had to write Unboxing Atlantis. I had to write the EPMC paper to actually launch the extended plasma electromagnetic cosmology. I had to write several different papers that laid foundations for what I wanted to say without having to make a 500-page paper. And so I reached out to Dr. Don Garnett, and he actually called me. I was very thankful about it. And he said, why don't you use the Io-Jupiter connection as a rough basis for what you're trying to do? Because
good call.
Right, because of the relative size and shape. Now, I realize that Jupiter's magnetosphere is a lot more energetic than ours, but we're a lot closer to the sun. So I figured I could get away with that a little bit. And so I started playing with that, and I started using Uman's models for step potential, because the center of my thesis, it goes right back to what the Delaware said, is that they were hit by these thunderbolts and they all fell over dead. So I recognize that what no one's talking about is step potential or step voltage. It's kind of implicit in what we've been talking about, but nobody's saying it outright. Everybody's anybody on the alternative side is focusing on the impact idea. But when I stop and think about it, and just anybody stop and think about the comet idea, if the comet is powerful enough, it's going to kill a lot more things than they've said, and it's not going to be selective about it. So you're not going to have grizzly bears surviving where short-faced bears went away. And you're also going to have, if you have an event that powerful, the whole world is going to have basically the same amount of extinction, and it's not going to be concentrated in an area. I certainly have, I debunk in here the idea that they hunted them all to death, because I think that that's based in we nearly wiped out the bison, but the natives would never do something like that. That's not something that, and they wouldn't have had the power anyways at that time. They were not even using atlatls. So, and it's very dangerous to hunt a mastodon or a mammoth. So my thought was, how can you selectively eliminate just certain species? And I started really analyzing, and I realized most of the species that we're talking about, that we were trying to figure out, they are large, and therefore don't do things like climb trees or go into caves. And when I started actually doing the work with Uman's equations, I learned that step potential is more powerful the greater the distance between the feet.
Yes.
And that became
loops.
Yes. And I'm going to let you go on about that when I finish here. I started doing the calculations, which are in the second half, but here you see the asymmetric glyphs. So these they're really clearly not symmetric. When you go to the Eagle Mound at I think it's Newark, they show you, like, there's this house, and they were using this house to burn things, and it was thatched roof, and I'm going, they have no basis for this. They have literally no concrete observation of this. And when you actually are on site, you can see that it's asymmetric. You can stand. I had my children stand at the nodes, and I roughly aimed it with my eyes. I'm like, oh, this is a serious thing. And when I started seeing it in the Kentucky rock art, I started realizing that the formation that they were seeing, it looked different than the Irish formation, which was the perfect Alwyn, because of the angle. Now, I couldn't tell you which body is which, but my conjecture is that there was some conjunctive alignment, that the Moon and Venus and Mars and Earth all shared towards the end, and that it reminded them of the ancient religion of the mounds. And so in the so-called Adena period, which is the Elegui period, they started revitalizing that religion in the northern hemisphere, because that religion obviously goes way back to the beginnings. I mean, in like Sumerian, Egyptian times at least. And they had an excess in this Kentucky rock art. You see an excess of left-footed glyphs, and then you find things like five-legged turtles. You find bear tracks that aren't bear tracks, right? They're very obviously round. This is a really interesting one that's at Tar Springs. And you see they were actually recording different times of the glyph. It can't be bird tracks. They never put two prints together. And birds don't move.
It looks like that mound you were just showing us there.
Yes, exactly. And the asymmetry of it, by the way, shows up in Ohio and in Kentucky. Different tribes, different people, probably didn't even speak the same language, but or the same dialect of that language.
They seem to be observing the same thing as it goes around, like we're seeing it from different angles.
And what they're labeling here, of course, the author's labels are the numbers, but we can see here Jupiter and Saturn very clearly, and then separately we see an interaction between two charged bodies with a number of things between them at 4 and 5, and that those to me are the so-called Valkyrie, right? These rogue asteroids. Now look at number 7. You have the Smile glyph, and it's probably more ancient. Number 9, you have the dot with the circle. It's within its Aten. Mm-hmm. So all of this stuff starts showing up, and it's in the Kentucky Rock Art record. And luckily, a lot of these sites are protected, by the way. Otherwise, I'd just go get you photographs myself. Right? They're not releasing where these are, which is good because in Kentucky there's a real bad problem of people chiseling these out, trying to sell them, and it destroys them.
Don't even talk to me about Albuquerque. Oh my God!
This bird feet thing actually reminds me of. You remember we had a discussion about this boat with something in the middle?
Yeah, like glyph number 14, right there.
Yeah, and also the others. I mean, the others kind of, if you kind of stretch it a little bit, it looks kind of like this boat with, I don't know, like a mast in the middle or something.
Yeah, or the little lotus flower sticking up in the middle of what's his name?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Go down. There's some more that have even more detail about the event.
Before we go further and lose it, I have something I wanted to mention. When we were talking about that you were showing that picture right at the beginning, or not at the beginning, but you were showing the crater with the ring. You don't have to go find it, Dave, or anything.
Okay.
But those that dotted one that you saw, and with the line sticking out of it, you said it was about a mile across, and I could see it like a horse track or race track to the side there. Anyway, that looks
pause right here, by the way.
Yeah.
Hold it on that page.
Okay, so it was. I noticed that the 3 pathways leading out were 120 degrees apart, more or less, just like in Ship Rock, but it also had that rim that reminded me of that crater up in Quebec. It's just the rim of it, and it's now a ring lake.
Right.
That kind of thing. It's like the sparks came down, but it did not have enough power to sort of like be the twisting Birkeland currents that would just literally create the crater and leave just a spire in the middle. So
what's
just interesting.
What's great about that, the Big Sink site, is it appears to be a almost single strike site, unlike some of the other ones that we're looking at worldwide, which are either very large, huge excavation sites, mountains being created, big events happening, Grand Canyon, prolonged discharges. Here we are seeing at the Big Sink a 56 ray discharge with a couple of them with crater rims for themselves. Right. And a stray that goes over and hits Mount Horeb, and then obviously they came later and repiled on the dirt to revive. They didn't use wheels because that would be disrespectful, right? It's not that the natives didn't know what a wheel was. They call it the Great Wheel. It's that it would be disrespectful, and so they piled on the dirt, and then they revered that site. And you have the same basic sea hinge in Indiana at Mound Park. So at the figure 30, go up slightly. I just want to point out that if you count the number of toes, now, first of all, this artist would have to be kind of mentally lost to not make the limbs the same size. Secondly, the amount of fingers. If you compare this with the Nazca monkey, it has the same number of fingers and toes in both, and the same deformation. The interpretation is different, and the Nazca monkey earthwork has obviously the spiral associated with the Venus. It looked like a spiral because of the way we were moving.
Right.
And you see that at Great Serpent Mound. But here they interpret it purely just as the plasma event, and you still see the 3-part asymmetrical glyph on the right in the groin area, and of course the mainstream, they don't know. They call it the stick man. They don't have any interpretation, And that's good on Fred Coy and his group. They weren't actually archaeologists. They worked with the archaeology department to get it all protected. There was a lot of apparently battling between them. It took like 20 years to get this book published. But all the better for us that it was done correctly. And I think that Figure 31 right below it is interesting because of the way that the artist actually maintained. They showed which way the streams were discharging, unless it's erosion, which is the other difficulty. And then you see the 5-pointed star above it, and then we can keep going.
I think you're actually seeing different things in my interpretation, but you know what? I'm not going to.
Here
we
go.
Judge too hard.
This is the one that blows my mind. This one's very clearly older than most of them. This is in the Big Turtle Rock Shelter, which means that it was protected very well. And I believe the Big Turtle Rock Shelter is in the gorge. You can see clearly they purposely embossed or carved in a way that would leave a sphere in the center. There is no interpretation by the West, and this is not a circle. They call it a concentric circle, but if you look, it's a hexagon. So what I think we're looking at there is direct proof that we could see Mars and Saturn in alignment. I think that they could see the actual storm because there doesn't appear to be any good reason why they could make a perfectly hemispherical embossed formation, but then they would fail to carve a circle on the outside. There doesn't appear to be any good reason to say that. Unless you believe, like the post-Victorian archaeology, that they weren't as advanced as everyone else in the world, which is nonsense to me. So we can continue there. I think you could go down. I just show a picture of that storm.
It does remind me of the hilt of the hilt, the very bottom, the pommel of a sword, where we used to put red gems right at the end of the sword too.
Yeah. That would be interesting if that was connected to, the most common weapon of the god.
But
I learned by doing this paper, and it's in the second half of the paper, is that the most common weapon of the god is the sword worldwide. The second most common is the arrow.
I think if I was to interpret this in the northern image, there was in some cases there was the back of the turtle, some cases the back of the elephant. To the north,
right?
But then but King Arthur pulled the sword from that stone, and that was his holy weapon for a while. Other swords showed up later, which were curved, like the katanas and the Middle Eastern swords that look like comets. They were the holy weapons there, but they still had red pommels on it, which I thought was a neat connection, like the serpent mound. Basically, they were like depictions of the serpent mound that they started hitting people with and realized they could kill each other and realized, hey, this is good. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, pretty much.
Type of mentality,
Yeah, I mean, and then who wouldn't interpret that as God's gift? I mean, if you can defeat your enemies.
He taught us how to make it. See?
He taught us how to make it, and fortune. So you see here the number of fingers and toes matching perfectly the Kentucky rock art. And so all you're seeing here is me going through and analyzing all this stuff, working out for myself, because I don't just listen. I mean, all respect to Mr. Thornhill, Mr. Talbot, to Eduardo Cardona, to everybody I'm going to do my own research. So I was at this time working this out for myself, and in some cases pulling out the caliper and doing ratio measurements. I really believe in ratios, and that ratios can show us. So this is the one I wanted us to get to. Is the progression from the alignment to the disalignment, the event itself, and then the end of the alignment, and showing the relationship between the Earth and the Moon as what's being left, and it happening under the time of Jupiter and Saturn. That's my interpretation of this dismal rock, is that the conjunction in the way that it moved with the backdrop of the others. Unfortunately, we don't know which constellation that was in, so it's really difficult to know which house and to age it that way. But
I think that'd be pretty hard anyway, since we wouldn't be able to even tell which one's the move. Like, if that is the coma of Jupiter and the coma of Saturn doing battle as they retreat, and maybe those little lights that you were seeing were or the little dots you were seeing were sort of like the when they were passing across the asteroid belt. Apparently, Jupiter totally messed up everyone nearby. It's like, hey, you get a lightning bolt, you get a lightning bolt, you get a lightning bolt, type of thing. So I don't know there, but the Valkyrie issue is a good interpretation as well, although I've heard different interpretations of that depending on auroras and stuff. But this right here shows a definite progression. You can actually see, like, did we get to see something go, like, is it 3 to 6, or is it the other way, of course? Because they could be getting scared as it keeps coming closer and starts basically going into arc mode. Like it could
but I don't know. I'm interpreting it from 6 towards 3 because of the increasing energy, but I don't know for sure, right? In this paper, I'm really clear to say this is my theory. I only use the moon, for example, because of the surface the surface evidence that goes with what we see on Mars, right? So I'm able to cite the documentary from the Thunderbolts project on Mars as showing evidence that we need to see on the moon. So when we get towards the M plates, the evidence that is all there, and it gives us something concrete to go with. I'm not saying it definitely was the moon that caused the extinctions. And obviously these Kentucky rock arts aren't necessarily the same period even. We're talking potentially 6 to 8,000-9,000 years apart. But the point being that the natives have great testimony, that they are not, it's not myth in that way, that it's actually a form of evidence that if you count it all around the world, then you can come to a pretty reasonable bit of work. This is also before
but if you keep talking like this, Carl Sagan's going to rise up from the grave and start chastising you.
Carl Sagan would not.
He's going to pull a Velikovsky on your butt.
I did the show with Madam Catherine. I did the show called the Velikovsky Conundrum. And I said, who are you going to trust? Because you have a guy making all these predictions, and then you have another guy who might be jealous because he didn't win the Nobel making the same predictions. So, no offense to Carl. It's just I think that we should go with what the natives.
Some offense to Carl.
Some offense to Carl.
Some offense, but not too much. He's good, but he did also do if you think that's bad and destroying Velikovsky was bad, the guy did invent the whole greenhouse gas thing that we're still dealing with today. So.
Yeah, lucky us.
Once again, have to note how this resembles, what we talked about before. How, for example, you can produce different letters of Hebrew alphabet from one shape, by turning it that way or the other, or how this Rongo script from Easter Island could be actually, the dynamic depiction of evolution of some cosmic phenomenon. Right. But this is what Robert Schock is talking about.
I thought the same thing with looking at runic language from the Norse, but that might just be because they were seeing sprites in the air that were like longer lived than our sprites, perhaps because of their location near the North Pole. But
maybe,
who knows?
What if the sounds of the runes though were the actual sounds in the air?
It's quite clear that they did hear things, like there was a vibration. The very first connection, when you talked about the stomping of the feet, in another interpretation, that was considered the great honker. When it came down, it just came down and made a great honk, which makes sense because we would hear honk like that type of
right.
And I could envision that there was a sort of electrical connection. It's amazing how they managed to use automatopoeia type of things to hold that word, the sound together. That must have been like 10,000 years ago. Who knows? But that would we can keep on going down, and hopefully we get through most of these rock arts, and then get to the discharges. Obviously, more of the same formations, but in embossed form. Same thing. The owl shape showing up. Here's the so-called Celtic cross. So you can see where the diffusionists would clearly think that this meant that Welsh people had been there, but now I do believe the Welsh have been there, but I don't think that they carved any of this stuff. I think that that's actually just kind of coincidental, actually. Now the reason the Welsh came isn't coincidental, by the way. That was also a electrocomet event, but that was hundreds of years after all this. That was after the Adena period, even. So, we were talking about some connection because the dolmen culture seemed to make it across. The people who built the little, I guess we call them.
Here we go.
Cellars, I guess over here they call them, but
So here we see, I think, one of my favorite ones from the Kentucky Rock Art series in Reedyville, and you can see the great man, and he's standing on the two-faced god here.
Yeah, he's screaming at something.
He's reaching, he's reaching out. But look at the discharges coming out the side of him. So there you have your horse running that's on fire shape. You have your five-legged turtle. Look at the arc loops.
Odin's horse.
At some angle, it looks like a boat. The standing guy. I mean, if you just turn it,
you're right. It does.
With his body, if it would become horizontal,
Here you have the swastika down there. You have, and then luckily here
the Nazis made it here. What?
Yeah, the Reedyville, or the authors here, they gave us the alignment and show you which way was north, so we can get sort of an idea as to which way everything was facing. And I haven't done an analysis on this one. If anybody wants to do this, if those are stars next to the X-Men sign, then that could be vital data for us. I think that there must be a couple of different events happening here because of the way the feet are changing shape, and because the three powers in the sky being moved around. Obviously, those are your three gods in Hindu, your three main deities in Norse. So the same time period as those. So that would roughly date
the three windows at the back of the church. Yeah,
right. It would roughly date it to the between the megalithic period and the transition period. All right, but so it's pre-religious, but it's after the archaic. So I think this is well after the first kind of events that I'm detailing with the megafauna extinction, but it would explain the religion that they had. Is why would they go through building all these mounds and it costing them so many calories and taking away from their other activities,
right,
if they didn't have a need to re-worship the gods, especially one who nearly wiped out everything? It would be my main point. As for Janus, I love the reference to, again, the moon, only because we know for a fact, because of satellite imagery, that the moon has two different faces. And one face in particular always looking at us, and being the watcher, as the New Milish calls it, and then the other face looking just beat up like pile of meat, like Mercury is. So to me, again, showing evidence that Janus may be a direct reference to the moon. There's certainly a lot of cultures that did worship the moon, and then I guess if sin, that word is related. I haven't done a study on the etymology of the word sin as we use it, but it might be related to worship of the moon. So could the moon have supplanted the god at one point? I think that there's possibility.
The upper part of this sequence of stars, if those are stars, it actually looks like Taurus constellation.
Right.
If you look it up, you'll see this.
So are you proposing then it's related to the Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven?
No idea. I don't know.
No, I think
I'm not even sure that it's Taurus, but it seems really like it.
Well, the Bull of Heaven story is a really fascinating. This Bull of Heaven is slayed by Gilgamesh, and the age of Jupiter's reign ends a little early. I think that could be a reference to one of our cataclysmic events, because we got to account for, what do the Chinese say? There's been 7 suns, or the Mayans, I think it was, and we have to account for which were the different catastrophes. The Greeks talk about the 4, and they're so common, even Disney put them in their Hercules film, right? You got the volcanoes, the freezing, the wind, and the earthquakes. So
I think they said sun, but in most cases it's actually skies. Like, it's ruled under a different sun, but they basically are saying that the skies changed, or the earth changed, or the environment changed, or something like that. And I think the last time was 20 some odd 100 years ago, when basically we started getting the Romans and Greeks started coming out of that. That was probably the last time. However, before I go any further, interesting thing, notice that symbol there. If you look at those 3 dots with the circle in it, that's underneath the arrow that sort of points north, kind of like that. If you go down all the way there, there's a symbol that looks like, I don't even know what to say. It looks like an X with a sort of like a ball sort of hanging to one side there, and it's basically above the word drawing, like literally above the word drawing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, that weird looking one? That one.
This one?
Well, I put a link in the thing, and if you go to about 23 seconds into that little link that I sent, you will see that exact thing happening. And this is apparently ferrohydrodynamics, so it should be related. But see what it starts doing.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
See what I mean? I'm starting to see that kind of thing. Now, obviously, this would be in 3D, and they're looking at it from different points of view. But, see? It starts doing this type of thing. Now, this is, of course, the motion is being connected by the inductive effect that's making them do this, because they're all reacting with each other. But the vibration is giving the motion, which is giving the induction. This wouldn't be necessarily the exact same case in space. There would be a little bit of vibration as the solar wind pumped across it, of course. But see how it morphs beautiful. And does these symbols that are something that you would be reminded of rock art, basically. So just figured an FYI to the people at home and to yourself,
It's also fascinating, that shape that we're talking about on the rock art. There's a mountain near Berea, a famous liberal arts college here in Kentucky, and it is roughly shaped like that. And I tell you what, Berea is famous for Edgar Cayce saying it was one of the only places in the world that would survive the next deluge. And of course, Sedona is quite famous for its Chi vortex.
Oh, it's beautiful.
But there's one in Berea as well, and the Chi vortex there centers around that mountain. It's called Indian Fort or Pinnacles, and it's right near Berea. If anybody ever gets a chance to go and view, there were Viking age. We don't know that they were Vikings, but there were walls that were put up there that have mostly been destroyed, which is really sad. But the mountain is basically in that shape. So the question is, and near to it, next to it, is something called Pilot Knob. And Pilot Knob is too tall for the plateau of that area. So it is over 1,400 feet tall, and it has the exact same shape as the Pilot Knob in, I guess it's North Korea, it might be in Virginia. And it also it reminds me, and it's later in the paper, it reminds me very much of the Devil's Tower, that we might be looking at an anode cathode discharge, and that mountain, the two mountains together might have been formed. This was an interesting one. So this wasn't Kentucky, but that Utah. If people go to the link that I had supplied in that, there was an argument between New Earth creationists and the scientists. Once they cleaned it up, everybody got really silent about what that glyph is showing. Is very clearly showing the great man frying all the animals, and then you've got horses on fire and a comet. But it was the whole thing is that the archaeologists were trying to get rid of the words of the New Earth creationists, and it's not a pterodactyl. I agree, it's not a pterodactyl, but then they don't want to talk about what it really is.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of reminds me of the great man holding Hercules, basically with the golden fleece hanging off one arm, more or less.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's what I'm looking at. The same thing is carved on the side of a hill in England there, the big giant man, but they found later on that the fleece that was hanging over his arm, because he had a club in one hand and he had his arm outstretched, and it made no sense why he was standing that way. Just like, bring it, But
yeah,
but they found that there is a slight ditch all around there, and they went and cleaned it out, and they basically painted with white, what just that was going to wash off, to show you what it was, where it was, and it looked just like that. It was sort of off to one side with the left side was sort of the fleece was not square, it was haphazard, or otherwise looked like it's been ripped off an animal, as opposed to cut,
Right.
Anyway,
this is all just again, people can read the New Middle East. I'm just bolding certain sections. We can go further on down into the paper, and get towards the Thunderbolts. You guys probably want to talk about Thunderbolts.
Well, I try to get these guys into Velikovsky stuff all the time, but they're so resistant. They're so tough. They're so hard to get to.
So was I. So was I. Okay, and for good reason.
Oh yeah, but when it's a little crazy. It sounds that way, but once you start realizing it's testimony, you're not so much,
Right. When I pulled the book off of the shelf, that was when it became real for me, because I had owned the rock art of Kentucky for many years, and when I pulled the In Search of Ice Age Americans off the shelf just to do some reference for the Hidden Kentucky project, and I saw that testimony from the Delaware, then I knew. Now this is some more large Lichtenberg. This is in Kentucky again. You can see very clearly where the strike was happening, and this is the Knobs region. The Knobs region is famous for being basically flat. We're talking like 900 feet, basically, all the way around, and only existing in like 100 miles wide, and it goes in a certain swath. So it's not actually part of the Appalachians. They say it's part of the Appalachians, but it's not. It's its own sub-region in Kentucky that extends from Liberty, Kentucky to Louisville.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dave, can you open the file that I've sent? It's this constellation thing. So that would be my best bet so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I sort of see where you're pointing to. I haven't done doing a ratio analysis of things beyond 3 or 4 stars can get a little bit complex. I'm told that my Great Pyramids of Kentucky was dense because of all the ratio tables, but what would be really interesting is to get all the raw data in a certain form, and then somebody who really knows how to do some statistical analyses of those to take those spreadsheets of data and whip them up into something beautiful.
If I learned anything from Jim, I learned that there is not all these stars move the same way.
That's true. That's exactly.
Apparently, some of them
right.
stay where they're at, and then everything moves around them, and that freaks me out just thinking about it. But
that's actually one of the most difficult parts of doing the Orion and Cygnus alignment, comparing them for the Great Pyramids of Kentucky paper, was that not all of them move at the same rate, and I had to use programs obviously to find the specific years, and then again using a caliper, but even with a very precise caliper, there's going to be a margin of error where things. Yeah. And in fact, it turned out that I know that the broadest site at Kentucky is aligned to Cygnus, but they still didn't have what I would call an engineer level precision of their ratio for the time that they had made it. And it's clear there's carbon dating to say, and it's reasonable carbon dating within the last 2 millennia to say when that happened. So there was still a large margin of error. So whoever made those mounds wasn't necessarily going for Giza-like precision. So it leaves it a little bit open. It could be Orion, but mostly because they have Lyra next to it, you can tell exactly. But anyways, that's not important, not pertinent to this.
Well, yeah, let's not dwell. Everyone worships in their own way, and if they're not going to be perfect engineers, let's not be too picky. They're trying to appease their gods. Come on, guys.
That's right. Now, the interesting thing I wanted to mention just about this Lichtenberg, when I actually discovered this before I was into the electric universe. So I was driving through this, and when you go over this area, there is a precipitous rise in energy you can feel. And it's a beautiful area if anybody ever gets a chance to go to Bradfordsville. There's a change in the feeling. So I actually led back in 2014 what I call a feng shui hike, and uncovered a hidden waterfall, and it was a waterfall pool with a geode open. It was just like gift to me. It was really a beautiful day, and I led it there because of this formation. I was actually trying to get on top of it to figure out what's up there, and I still haven't been on top of that to see. So that is a future trip to go to the top of that formation where that plateau is and actually see what kind of things we could find. Who knows? We might find some spherules laying around. It's possible.
Mm. Well, I'll tell you what, on the way to Denver and to way to the geology tour there, I'll pick you up on the way. So we'll have a great time.
There we go. I think we're all familiar with the Grand Canyon, the Lichtenbergs there. I don't think I have to convince this audience.
Yeah. It's a great shot, though.
That actually is a beautiful shot. I like how, you notice how the land beyond is flat? If you zoom out further, you can tell that all of that whole area was etched, even like not just the canyon, but the part around it that you think is like the flat area. That's actually lowlands compared to what was beyond. So it's kind of neat how it goes down and then it goes down, 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 down.
Yeah. And you can tell where the river's been there only a little while, because you can see the valleying down at the bottom of the formation. That's what water does. It doesn't do the other part of it. And here in Kentucky, we have the famous Red River Gorge. It's internationally famous, and it's really obviously different than the knobs. The knobs appear to be a lot younger, and the formations with them are much closer to Lichtenberg. And surrounding the knobs is more water erosion. You can see the divide exactly where that was happening.
I noticed the river there that you were showing in one of the maps there that had a winding river, but it had Lichtenberg figures all off of it that were. I mean, from what I was looking at, I was like, well, that looks pretty electrical. They're very short, very stubby, at right angles. Not typical rivers. Anyway, go on.
Here, just going over the mound culture, why they would worship the mounds, what the pyramids are about. Now, this is before I wrote the Ferris wheels and Dionysian irony paper, which is just a fun paper if people want to be interested in what we did with electrical energy. As soon as we had it, we created these places of almost death where you can go and cathartically experience nearly dying on top of these cosmic motifs. But you're safe mostly. People do die, but you're pretty much safe. You're pretty safe, generally speaking. So.
They still tied that little thing around your waist so they could drag you out when you touched it. They're like, oh, he's safe. Oh, he died. Okay, just drag him out here. Just get him out here.
Yeah.
Throw him on the pile with the rest of them. Yeah.
I hadn't specified about in this paper. I hadn't necessarily specified that all the world's cosmic mounds were related to this one motif. But I think Dave Talbot does that pretty well in his. So I didn't really feel the need, because obviously all that's been cited in here, so people will be able to find it. These are more glyphs around the world.
Those war tridents or whatever they were.
I've been thinking.
So here's a sea hinge. Here's a sea hinge.
Nice. Go ahead. Oh, in the sea. Wow, is that in the sea?
This is Mount Horeb. This is the site that I'm talking about here in Lexington. That it goes right back to just after. The Mars potential Mars event, if you're into Velikovsky's dating, so like 600 BC, and its entrance faces the 56 Ray crater, 23 kilometers away. Which if you use spatial dimensions from the top of the atmosphere, that's a small. It's like a 4%. It's between a 20 and 4% difference, or it's just not a far distance to go, 23 kilometers. So I think it was related to the same event. I don't have proof, obviously, because I'm not in charge of excavating the site. And the way they excavated is they just cut a ditch from the center all the way through the outer rim on the left. But I'm sorry, you were gonna say something.
Yeah, I've been thinking about sundogs and all of the different types of geometry that are created from sundogs, and then realizing that if the North Americans did have surviving the an ice age, if it did start getting really cold down south, they would start seeing the sundog geometry, and that could be part of the Peratt instabilities, or even the dancing squatter man. Because I don't really hear us really talking too much about this, because this is something that we see already, and they change. I've seen so many different geometries come off of this, that this could be sort of some of the plasmoids, or some of the stuff that could be carved in the petroglyphs.
Well, I think that's a possibility for sure, because you're talking a reflective. Probably a fractal behavior of electromagnetism itself. Because one thing that we haven't talked about, the whole reason I wrote the Magnetic Universe paper was to deal with people's attempts to unify, but by ignoring electricity. And one thing that's true is that we don't know enough about electromagnetism, about the force. We'll just call it the force, because we all know that it's a unified, we're seeing it in different ways, but its behavior is going to change depending on scale and what I also call compounding. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the alchemical concept of compounding, but basically that you can have within a data set, you'll have I guess you would call a spectrum, a linear spectrum, or perhaps a exponential spectrum of the way things are behaving. But then when you zoom out past that data set, you're getting a repetition of that. But the behaviors in each data set, though they may have the same kind of scaling up factor, they may not actually be the same in how they're behaving. There may be a new or random, it seems random, change in the behaviors, and to us that presents a new phenomenon. Let's say gravity versus electricity, and actually it's just a change in the behavior because of the scale. And I think that that is what's tripping us up as a species. That and our dualistic
message
mind
is coming through really strongly.
Yeah, our dualistic mind is also the other issue, because when we look in the Fibonacci sequence, we are supposedly from 3 on, right? We're heaven, man, earth. When we try to look past that asymptote back to the 0, 1, 1, and 2, we are always going to apply that dualistic filter, and it's something that we really can't help to do. And that's a famous conundrum in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, that mankind constantly. So, for example, a person might be really into to leaving the material world, and then they start to cling to voidism, or to quietism, or to the non-form. But if you go deeply into Buddhistic study of source texts, right, then you end up at a place where they say you shouldn't cling to form or formlessness. And this is just an issue of the dualistic mind, so where we want to divide it all up, and realistically it's all a fractal phenomena. The nerves are structured, the nerves and the roots and the galaxies are all structured in a filamentary structure, which the Chinese call the wood phase, and that is reflective of the laws of energy and the laws of life as well. And then all of these laws really are just part of the laws of electromagnetism. It's just that we have divided the electromagnetic laws from thermodynamics, from all the other sets of laws, and that's convenient for us, but it's not really reflecting what we're going on.
We didn't divide it. We haven't found the complete link between all of them.
I don't think you can. That's my point.
I think that it's possible, but
if you, I mean,
that's a grand unified theory right there. Everyone's looking for the
Well, I just think that we went off.
Simplicity of consciousness.
Yeah, let's not dwell on that. But
this is important.
It's a very strong state.
No, I didn't mean that. I meant.
Well, here's my point about it is that when you look at any of the fractal sets, like take just a simple Mandelbrot, your mind is convinced that you're about to see the end of the Mandelbrot. You're convinced that if you go up or go down, you are about to see it.
Yeah, your brain will do that. That's natural.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it is natural for us to think that we're going to see the edge of the universe. And now you have Big Bang saying they can tell you what happened before the Big Bang. It's kind of it's just a problem of a finite consciousness. So it's like everything is up. We can go up to billions. After that, it doesn't matter to us. Realistically, it's like millions, billions, trillions. By the time you get to trillions, it's yada yada.
Well,
because
but I think
billions of years, billions of cells, billions of galaxies. We don't really have the capability to
fathom
that there may be a data set that behaves slightly differently, but reflects a central behavior theme.
Well, it's like a human body. A human body is not really a human. It's a symbiote of trillions of cells.
Exactly.
And then we start thinking like that on that level. Then you start participating in something that I call fractal thinking. And once we become aware of an idea or a concept, our mind, if it starts to wrap around it, we can create a premise and really actually extend. That's what I love about like ideas and studying is Oliver Wendell Holmes said it best. I can't remember the quote, but once you wrap your mind around a new idea, you can't transform back to where you once were.
Actually, that's literally the first line of my paper I wrote. It literally says, "You can't go back." And it's true. Once you've switched to the new paradigm, you can't go back to the old paradigm, the old way of thinking.
That's exactly right.
I mean, you can remember it. I can remember and even reference, Big Bang cosmology and relativity. But realizing that there's much better way of describing these effects makes that seem obsolete just in your mind. It just doesn't function, especially when you're trained in the other one. Electrical engineering, I mean. But when I was saying that the connection can be made, it was a in the Wallace Thornhill idea that once you can reduce all physical processes to electrical processes, the movement, like even hands hitting each other, is just technically electrical fields hitting each other.
Right.
So in that sense is what I meant, that you could probably get down to the core of it, not necessarily know everything, but at least see the connection between all things. And that building a formula from that would be, I think that was just our big mistake. I can't blame the people. I mean, they were like, he was coming up going, we only have one galaxy to play with, guys. So we don't even know the existence of other galaxies. Oh, and by the way, no redshift. So we're just dealing with that. How is this held together? Gravity? Gravity. Done.
People should realize people should realize two things about the chronology. If you read some of my other papers, is A, we knew more about the atom and electricity before we actually formalized that the universe is bigger than the solar system. That's a fact. That's a historical fact. And also that we knew we didn't have a working atomic model until well after electromagnetism formula had been written, let alone the actual work that went into discovering this stuff. There wasn't any math at all from Franklin through till Maxwell. There basically wasn't anything workable. Maybe Ohm's law, but that was all decades before we had formal understanding. We did know about redshift. And we had spectrology, but there was a big argument, between Hubble and his detractors as to how big the universe was officially. And so we are constantly fighting the
You're
fact
talking
that,
1930s though.
Yeah. And so we're discovering things out of order. It's the way it's got to be done, but it's also.
No, we discover as we discover.
No,
we're not done.
There's not really an order. That's, I think, what we're finding. We're discovering that these accidents, some of the greatest things have been discovered by accidents.
Well, but we also have. Go ahead.
The order that we discover them just happens to be the order that we discover them, and a lot of the time it's reverse engineering. The idea comes first, or the bottle can opener. We've talked about this before. The bottle can opener was just invented years after the can.
Right.
Yeah, because everyone carried a goddamn knife. So
only what I mean by out of order is out of order in terms of how human nature will, because of our tendency to cling to the first bit of knowledge and go, this is the way. Like Newton.
That's what I was going to touch on. Yes.
Gravity then became dominant. If Franklin had discovered electricity and if everybody had followed Gilbert from Gilbert's time to now, then it would have probably gone a lot different. And it is what it is. We have to obviously deconstruct and re-engineer, and that's fine because usually what we first learn is wrong anyhow, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, and the audacity of thinking that in less than 100 years we can come up with the answer to the entire universe is just ridiculous.
And the Chinese.
Go ahead.
The Chinese would also say that as soon, by the way, as we get a nearly complete model, then some quantum like event is going to come along and overthrow the entire paradigm. And there's going to be a time period between when, for example, with quantum up through the 90s where everything's going to get more ridiculous because the question is your idea weird enough? And then everybody gets bad. But it's the liberal conservative dichotomy that you're going to have as knowledge goes up and it goes down, where you have generations of students and they believe in their teacher and they believe in their teacher's teacher, and they see this in martial arts, and so paradigms don't shift until they're forced to shift.
Yeah, hero worship again.
Yeah, hero worship. Yeah, it's a hero. It's a form of
nothing wrong with that. But the trouble is that me and you, for example, who might have, I assume that you've studied Eastern philosophy and religion, can tell you, if I said Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Siddhartha, then you can go, I see what you're saying, because you've studied those three. But at the end of the day, to people outside, they're just names. So the same thing applies to, Einstein. Well, if you know about physics, then like we do, you start to see, or at least just generally a fascination interest, an amateur interest could do it. It doesn't have to be professional. You can appreciate all of the way that we discovered what we discovered, all the way from, say, like 1750 till now. And then you can see where we started turning and we started forgetting to do certain things like ask assumptions. So as of May something to this year, it'll be 100 years, because it was 1919 that he made the observation out there. I think it was like May 1st or something, and it was Eddington that looked up at the sun and said, see that star near the border? It moved closer to the sun. Therefore, Einstein's right. That is not science.
Right.
You see, you're not falsifying. You use one experiment. If you want to falsify, you would do a million. No, because your goal is to falsify. That's what I mean. You can never prove correct in science. You must always prove not wrong. If that makes sense.
I think you can prove pointers
according to this experiment.
No, it moved, but his assumption was it was because of gravity, and Einstein was right. That's the assumption. But we've learned later that Dowdey and others have proved that, or at least shown, that refraction could be able to be the same effect, is what I mean. So you can see the effect, you can show it's real, but if you don't have a cause and effect connection directly, because really there's no reason why gravity should be proved to bend space. There's no...
Right, there's no mechanism.
Why?
There's
no mechanism.
I'll tell you exactly why, because
general relativity gives you a mechanism.
Right, but general relativity, I mean, if we go back to special relativity...
It's a reification of a mathematical process, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that mathematical process all started with...
And what is a theory? It's reification of mathematical entities,
Well, no, but
it's what you said before, like you want to discover some ultimate formula that would describe everything, but that is exactly...
But I don't think it's going to happen on my lifetime.
Me too. Sure, it's not going to happen anytime.
It's like working towards utopia. So, that's what I mean. It's like you work towards utopia, but the chance of you finding it, is low. It's the same thing with the theory of everything, I assume. Plus, you don't even know what you don't know. Like, if you don't even know when the quantum thing would change, like as you said, if something changed and went into a different state, for example, gravity is now different, and all the principles of materials are different, either slightly or greatly. Well, then everything we know literally is wrong. We wouldn't even know how to do certain things, because the things that make an engine work are now different because of the electrical properties of the planet or something weird like that.
Well, I wasn't saying that literally the constants would shift. I think.
I actually am into that area, but if I might be so bold, I only mean to interrupt for a minute because I want to answer your question, Eugene. The difference is physics is the reification of reality, but I said the reification of mathematics. They have a failure in their mathematical formula, and so they are trying to reify their error. The same thing happened with dark matter, for example, in my opinion. They basically have a number wrong, and they go, well, this must be invisible stuff. They don't go back and re-examine their assumptions. They just assume that they're right, and this is the error because Newton must be sacrosanct. This is the reification that I mentioned when he instead of doing 1,000 tests and so forth to figure this out, they did one and declared it real, and we moved forward. That has led to a cascade of problems with the idea that space can be bent and time can be malleable and there's multiple dimensions. And if that turns out to be, that is the basis for literally all that sci-fi and every other idea that ever popped out of there. If that turns out to be an incorrect assumption and Einstein proves to be wrong and everything is based more of a optical effect plus electromagnetism, then this whole idea of what we think the future of science is, or the idea of warp drive, is all just poppycock, really. And it's very strange. It's a very strange place to live.
My point earlier wasn't quite, I think, understood. What I was saying is that the Chinese hold that as soon as we get sort of close to understanding something, that we'll have basically, again, the scale being, in this case, of a zoom, we'll see a more complete picture. There will be more data on the outside, and there will always be more data on the outside, and there will be a quantum era-like shift of a world-toppling event that says, you don't really understand what electromagnetism is. Even when we just nearly unify the strong force, and when it's all unified, then something new will come about. Some kind of I don't know.
You mean mental observation that would basically.
Yeah, there will be something that overcomes that tendency. That's what the Chinese say is going to happen because of the Taiji, which is the yin yang.
James Byrd would love you, just.
Oh, I would love him too, I guess.
Well, he did his Day of the Universe Changed thing is basically all about this. How every time we discovered something new and we spread it around the world, humanity changed, and the way we view things. And this is what I agree with that very wholeheartedly. That I think that all of the work of quantum mechanics and astrophysics could eventually be like the idea that we have different variations of studying the same subject. There should be a realization that we're still all on the same page. The idea that we threw away natural philosophy and stuff like that was obviously an error in my thinking. But
you could actually, there's ideas out there. Well, at least I think like this. Possibly that when
this is going to be good, by the way. I want to hear how Buddy thinks.
When people channel, I'm sure there's probably an idea already out there, but aren't they all?
Yeah.
When people channel different entities, like from Atlantis and other people channel these different.
Hello?
Different silence.
We lost you, I think.
Oh, okay.
I think
he exploded. All right, so Buddy's now dead. Moving on.
Do you want to go back to the Thunderbolts?
Yeah. Back to what you were saying there, Shifu, Master, whatever your name.
Well, is. Sure. By the way, Shifu doesn't mean master. I
don't know what it means.
It just means teacher. Like because I teach martial arts and I do acupuncture.
That's great.
Yeah, it's
really a pleasure to have you on today. Your enthusiasm and energy and just breadth of knowledge is very impressive.
I've been talking to this guy. He is fantastic. It was great to watch your No Cast, the one that and thank you very much for getting me on that, by the way, the No Shit Cast with Matt there. And
I like the latest one too.
Huh?
It was just shared. There was one that was just shared recently. Was that like a recent one?
Yeah, the fourth one that I did with Eric Wilson, who you guys, my goal is to get Chris Dunn and Eric Wilson on your all's cast sometime because...
Well, we want to get Chris Dunn back on, so we'll let you know when that's happening. So
you'll get Eric Wilson with them. That's make sure you get them both. Anyways, here's just the difference.
Well, we'll have to make sure he likes it, but yes, I know what you're saying. So.
Yeah. Just you can. These are more serpent mounds that show the different formations. These are serpent mounds that many people aren't aware of.
That's very one. Where's that? Can you back up slightly? I'm sorry. Did it say Nova Scotia? No, Kansas.
It's Kansas. Yeah.
Kansas.
That's very gone now. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's just terrible. Can I just burn that into my memory a little bit? Because that's a drawing or a painting.
That looks like a lithography.
So they basically cut into the ground like a sand trap, and that was
most of these. Yeah, most of these have been plowed up,
or God, that's just horrifying.
Used. Yeah, it's pretty horrifying. What's happened to, and that's why I start my paper so.
These are works of art, you know.
I start so anti-establishment because even the word Adena actually signifies that's the name of the farm where they had them come out and tear down a mound, so they started calling the whole culture Adena, and to me that is really kind of a heinous thing to do. But so so this is the serpent mound. This is one of the rare drawings where you see the bow shock in front of the egg, and so being in front of the egg, it can't be an egg, can it? And it's certainly not an anatomical feature of a snake. So that feature, by the way, has been basically plowed away. Like there's like a triangular buttress in front of the egg. There is something that it was in front of the Great Serpent Mound. When you look at any modern scans or go to the site, it has been removed. Now, I'm not saying that they removed it because they didn't like it there. I'm just saying it was there, and then now it's not there.
Well, I see a triangle there now, and I assumed just from looking at it, it was footpath related, but
even there, it's flattened. But originally, in the oldest sketches, it was actually a mound.
Now you've put yourself in a different position. So yes, now that I would go with you on that. You're right, but that obviously, and me and Eugene would love to debate that because we did it before. But regarding bow shock, whether or not it's actually a bow shock or is it part of the coma that is being dealt with the solar wind, and of course, therefore, an electrical phenomenon, which would be my first guess. But still,
right.
Moving on.
Right. Yeah. Again, I don't know enough about cometary plasma physics to argue with anybody. I'm just presenting the
literally.
The data.
We are the forerunners. Don't worry.
I don't.
It's a very small list.
I don't have anything that I want to talk about with the Bosnia pyramids. We can just, unless you guys just really want to talk about.
I did talk to Sam. That experiment that Sam did, where he went up to the top of them and tried to find out whether or not there was a voltage difference between the top of a pyramid and a bit further up.
Yeah.
I gave him that hint to do that. I was saying, hey, if you want to know if this is a real pyramid, you can check to see if there's a thing above it. And I mailed him just straight up, and he was like, thank you very much for the thing, and he went and gave it a shot, and apparently that was very convincing to him. I hope that I didn't give him wrong information now, but...
Well, no, I think it's really valuable. Lee Pennington's actually been inside of those pyramids, and there is definitely some really bizarre stuff going on. So this section of the paper is just covering the cosmic mountains. And
you got that close to that? Like, you didn't get this close. This is obviously from the 40s, right? That pyramid?
This is an older picture. Yes, correct. This because it's been shut down. You can't get down. You can't get there anymore. Here. Yeah, it's been a photo taken a few decades ago. Before
anyone who's listening cares, though, there's like hundreds of pyramids in China, and you can't get anywhere near the darn things. They get covered over with trees. They're trying to hide the fact that they exist. It's weird. So
it is really strange.
We'll leave it there. But then again, you know
really
what?
Strange.
They got down to the middle of Mexico there, and they saw a really high mountain, and they decided to build a church on top, and it turned out that church was a pyramid, and they didn't even realize it was so covered in dirt. Makes you wonder about Rome being covered in dirt and other places covered in dirt, but again, weird.
Yeah, there's very coincidental, you would say. A little too coincidental. So I think all the Thunderbolts stuff and the plates are all in the second file, the 100 after page 100. Let's see here. Hopefully that is this. No, that's the magnetic universe theory. So there was a second on the.
I have to get to the chat, perhaps. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, from the link in the chat, there's a second. There's this when you go to the academia.edu, there's actually two files because believe it or not, Google Docs couldn't handle the memory to either print the PDF or download it, and I didn't take the time to open it in Acrobat and merge the files back together.
Okay.
So yeah, it's the same link. Yeah. And then where it says files 1 of 2, you just switch it to the second one.
Okay.
Yeah. It would be the bottom one, I guess, probably. Oh no! Yeah, you don't. You can send.
Should we say something? No.
You can skip it. Less email for me to check later.
Yeah, of course.
Welcome from the Electric View. Hey, what's going on? By the way, thankful that Richard joined us for as long as he did. I was hoping he was going to ask a question because usually his questions are pretty deep. So, but he can only stay for so long. So
right. Understandable. Oh
my God!
Probably.
Please stop. You're blowing
Go
my
ahead.
mind. Can you scroll slightly down, like so you can see the bottom picture there? That's a Sheena Nagig. That right there on the wall, that from Best World Cities, whatever that little link is there. That girl up there, the skeletal girl that's doing her thing there with her oversized whatchamacallit there, is a Sheena Nagig. That's literally the term for I'm sorry. I find this to be just fascinating. Here, I'll go and gig. I'll actually just link it here real quick, and you can take a look at what I'm talking about. And these are, in my opinion, depictions from a later time, perhaps, of that formation. You can take a look at what I'm talking about. I just said it's a Wikipedia article, so it's going to be very short and clear.
Yeah.
See what I mean? The same symbolism.
That's exactly right. And I think that Dave, that video by Dave Talbot, it was one of the Discourses of an Alien Sky, was one of the underrated videos.
I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, wow.
But anyway, it's a symbol is, hunkered through there, and it's an Irish thing, and they used to hide these. The reason we even know about them is because they hid them in the churches themselves. So they were told to tear down their old structures and build a church way back when. And they did, because, assholes. And they went ahead and, but they hid these symbols, the Sheen and the Gigs, in places where no one would notice. So the priests never saw them, like out back behind the, whatever, like just on the top of things, like hidden out of view if you didn't go looking up. You know what I mean? And so no one ever really found too many of them. And so the building was never torn down or anything as like heresy or blasphemy or whatever the heck they would say at the time. So, yeah. So anyway, just very weird stuff.
And there's a lot of stuff hidden even in the biggest churches, like this Hagia Sophia in Istanbul.
Really?
There's a huge chunk of some imagery that is hidden until this day. Yeah, where they have these, for example, shields on the walls with some inscriptions in Arabic, or I don't know, probably Arabic.
I've seen some Arabic influenced stuff throughout all of Russian type territory. I thought it was very interesting to note that connection, because we're taught so many different things about what we're supposed to dislike, but in actuality, it's like we were in the past, we were sharing like children, almost, in certain ways.
That was the table with the assumptions, by the way, that we happened to pass just a second ago.
Skip over? Yeah,
so you can see, I think it might be interesting for people to know, there's a whole lot of things that we have to take for granted that we just can't really know. And I have this concept of of surge or pumping like behavior, because most of the universe does work in sort of boluses of like squeezing more in and out, and there may have been a peak of the discharge and or repeated discharges in many of these places. So I can't model how far the step potential would come out from that, like from the Grand Canyon, let's say. I honestly couldn't tell you how big. This model that I present in here is literally using the spherical calculations, which might be better to use cylindrical, on the assumption of a certain crustal depth, or a limestone depth, and take the center of, let's say, the Midwest, and say what is the average limestone depth in the Midwest, and then use it as a cylindrical shell. I didn't do that. I used I put the spreadsheets in here, by the way, in the paper. Right. I urge people to download the spreadsheets, take the numbers, cut it all up, do whatever you want to create your own version of how far, and see how far we can get a single Thunderbolt. Now, I'm working on the next paper, so there will be a little bit more information, from Peratt and from what I find on site, so that we can work towards creating a workable model to determine, because my goal was to determine, especially in the classical section, is how many of these suckers would it take to end an ice age, or how many, how much energy are we talking about roughly? And in the new paper, which we aren't going over, but I definitely show that between the classical model, especially with the new number, the 8,000 volts per meter provided by Sapphire, and with air, and then using the MHD model, and then using Peratt's numbers and comparing them, it's pretty much in the ballpark of, we're talking 10 to the 12 to 10 to the 15 joules, sometimes 10 to the 18 joules in a single stroke. And that would be, again, a 100 foot by 100 foot, not one of those, the whole the whole thing. That's a single stroke. We're talking a bikini bomb, each one. And so if you pump up the limestone table and it's wet enough, that is going to radiate out for a long distance. These are using, again, the distances here. The reference there is the moon distance. So the full distance is the current distance for the moon.
Well, you can.
And this is the classical. This is again the classical planar model. And again, this was before Sapphire's latest release. So we're talking the 20 megavolts per meter permittivity. That is not likely to be correct, but they haven't put out any papers. I keep bugging Michael. I say, when are you all putting out my paper? He never answers me, so
I
don't know exactly.
They want to be really exacting.
I understand.
People like ourselves
totally
can be a little bit more, free-flowing. But so we were just talking about literally the other day about an Etruscan city getting destroyed by a mile-wide lightning blast. So, just a zorch.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking here, you could see here the exponents are really large, and then I broke it down into kilocalories so that we could talk about how much it would take to, get rid of Antarctica, because Antarctica is a large icy body we can relatively talk to, because the other problem with the alternative common impact theory is they want to be both the beginning of the Younger Dryas and the end, and that doesn't make sense to me. You have to pick one. So if it's the beginning and it caused the ice age, then what melted everything? Now, it could have been the sun, and it could have taken place over a long period of time, but here we have these craters, and they're telling us these craters were below the ice by 2,000 meters. So, again, we need energy for getting rid of ice, and we need to get rid of it in a hurry.
Well, or lack of
energy. What do you think about the idea that these events might be caused by like a super powerful CME from the sun?
I think that the micronova idea is perfectly workable in the flare. I haven't read yet the God Flare book. I think that it's totally workable that there is a period of time where probably Saturn did have a major flare, and we could do that. I don't see any evidence that it was the sun, but that Saturn itself could have flared, and that could have charged up all of these things. Or it could have charged up all these different bodies at the same time. The problem is what we actually see with the natives. Their testimony is very clear that there were objects that moved close to the planet. Now, could those objects have moved close instead of arcing and just incited through kinetic motion, in the movement of these magnetospheres past each other? That could have easily lit up the ionosphere. I'm not discounting the micronova idea. It's just probably need more evidence compared to what's actually said in the Enuma Elish and in the testimony around the world. You have and I have it in this paper, the statement of how Quetzalcoatl died is extremely explicit. He went out to the beach, and his heart was ripped out of him, and it was green, and then it goes from him to it, and it says it became the evening star, and he died, and he entered the sea. So he died and he entered the sea. So, it wasn't a white man, he wasn't an Atlantean.
You have to understand what the sea was at the time, I guess, right?
Right, which is the sky. It's the black
the waters above, the firmament,
above.
The term for
Hades,
an aurora that spanned the world. Well, out past the river Styx, you see, out past the Seven Rings, that's where people go to die. That's beyond the river. To the south, which is, if you were in the North Pole, or not North Pole, sorry, Northern Hemisphere, that's where things would go to die. North, of course, would be heaven, so the pole. It's a very odd situation because it only works in the Northern Hemisphere. But to be fair, most of the humanity is on the Northern Hemisphere. The stuff from the Southern Hemisphere, below Peru and below in Australia, for example, their things are slightly different, and they're totally into that man on the South Pole. Yeah. They're totally into that guy down there. It's a different ball game down there. But it seems that there was rings. There seems that there were there's so many. To imagine the sky being that different, that every night you woke up with it being that different with your own two eyes. I mean, it is almost as hard as learning a new paradigm. It is that big of a switch. So
this graph here, you can ignore it because I was still learning to use the Google. It doesn't have much interest for the discussion. It's further down. So here's proposing under the idea that the moon is even still not incredibly stable. We can make our predictions about eclipses and all the cycles of the moon only because of modern science. Actually, I have a whole book of the Chinese trying to figure out how to predict moon behavior, and there's a number of chaotic effects in the moon. And so my proposition here is that it did come in close, and then it had kind of a wobbly orbit before it got into a more stable path. And this is not to scale, obviously, right? This is just showing that there was an electric field generated as one comes in and affects the other. And then, of course, there's a scorching on one side, and it becomes tidally locked to the Earth and faces the same direction each time it goes around. So instead of a big whack theory, which relies on an accretion that just doesn't work out for explaining why the moon has a different tilt and why it wobbles up and down. If you look at any eclipse pathway predictions, they're always going in all sorts of directions. They're never just going in an even layout across the surface of the Earth. Why? Because the moon is actually itself not stable, as in the same way that we think of the Earth going around the sun and its orbit being, quote, stable. And I haven't analyzed that. I don't know if we know the precise, maybe Eugene knows, but I don't know if we know the precise equatorial plane of the sun. I think we have a basic idea, but I don't know if we know it so perfectly we can say that the Earth is exactly where it needs to be. So here, I'm just talking about the amplification effect that could have existed with multiple strokes. It's not pertinent to the actual calculations. It's just talking about why, this model. I'm saying, I'm letting people attack the model because I'm saying it's not complete. There's no way that I can complete this model without the kind of tools that someone like Mr. Peratt has, and even he may not be able to complete the actual calculations necessary. But using Io and Jupiter as our basis, we can look at what kind of currents we're talking about, and try and come up with a range. In the classical model, I tended to go down by 1,000 because I think that the numbers were ridiculous. Frankly, I think my brain can't handle the kind of power that we're talking about. But it is quite possible that it is more. And when I looked at Peratt's paper that I just am using for this newer addendum, that's exactly what he's talking about. Somebody named Mr. Gold. I don't know who Mr. Gold is, but he's going up by a whole order, 3 orders of magnitude. So it's any range in there. I mean, that's a huge difference, but it's still all well above a Bikini H-bomb. So the type of power that we're talking about is really, really huge. So
Gold actually had several ideas related to the electric universe. For example, one idea that we've discussed with Bob Johnson sometime earlier was, again, that the powerful CME from the sun could have induced large currents at the, through the crust, basically, possibly creating some mountain ranges or something like that. So as far as I know, that was Tommy Gold's idea.
Okay. Yeah, so I haven't even gotten into his research. I'll definitely pull it up for the current paper. So this is, again, Gernot and then the Uman work in talking about step potential and using spherical radiation to talk about how to calculate the potential voltages. And then by using the resistances of flesh, which then I had to research, lightning safety and electrical safety for different animals. And here's another assumption. Are those impedances going to be the same from mammal to mammal? Probably not. The question is, were mammoths and mastodons, for example, more or less prone to be killed because they have very sensitive feet? And it's obvious, when you talk about like the short-faced bear, it's so big it doesn't climb trees, versus grizzlies and brown and black bears, which even when they're young, they climb trees. That's the easy thing to look at, but are they experiencing the step potential differently because they're also not just their feet are wider apart, but maybe the actual conductivity properties of their paws are different. I can't answer. All I can do is provide the average mammalian impedance and use that to calculate a current flow. Here you're getting down into the weapons of the gods here, and that's where I give the actual names of these different weapons of the gods. Most of them are swords. Again, a lot of swords, a lot of spears and arrows. And these are the different kinds of weapons of the gods on the left, and then the various names over towards the right. It took a lot of research. I'm not going to lie to put all of this together. Yeah, and a lot of stuff. The bibliography is really stout, and I want to say right now that I owe it to 3 women. Right, my wife for putting up with my craziness. Even me being here, right, and then my assistant, my personal assistant, who did a lot of the editing, and she turns these links, all these footnotes into the bibliography. And then I have a student, a Tai Chi student, who also is excellent at editing, and so they were able to go through and find a lot of errors. I'm sure there are still more errors. It's just one of those things where I'm so busy, I keep them hopping all the time with new ideas, new papers, and they enjoy it. Certainly, Macon has had a blast, and she somehow thinks I'm like a genius, and I'm just following the evidence. Right, because I started off doing Hidden Kentucky Project, which was literally I needed places to hike, so I didn't go crazy, and then from there ended up with native stuff, and from there ended up in Electric Universe, and from there now look at me.
That's amazing. Do you have a publisher? Or are you intending to publish? Or?
Okay, so the future of the EPMC is that one day I will, I got to get the chess book and the Hidden Kentucky books out from under me, and then I will start to collect the EPMC stuff into, I guess, volumes or collections. One of the cool future papers, the reason I started even writing papers, aside from needing them for this one, is for us to have tools. So there's a number of tools, like in that Magnetic Universe paper, Table 7 has all these currents that we talk about all the time from all the scales. And then you see in this neutrino one, the second one over there, and that says gravity, it says neutrino, the tab.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
If you go to the right.
Sorry, my eyesight is a little.
And then no, not gravity, but the one next to it. The other way. There you go. And if you scroll down, pretty far, actually, you can skip all the text, and so that's just me debunking dark matter people.
Okay.
I'll go up.
Wow.
Go up.
Up.
No, go up.
This way?
So, no, yeah, keep going up to the tables.
This is down for me, but...
Scroll
okay.
back.
Okay.
So, like, page, it's probably like 9 or 10. You see here, page 6 it is.
There.
That table right there, if you go up one more, that's the falsifications table, but the table above it, that's me putting everything into chronological history for us,
cool.
Giving citations so that we can actually go, so, the official Birkeland currents, here's when they happened versus when the quantum radiation versus QEM, so that we can see. I'm not saying that anything's out of order, so to speak, but I am saying that there is a reason why you can see, for example, that relativity theory predating special relativity, predating general relativity, that's understandable. But where did the electron theory and the model, the atom theory being proved, where did that lie in that development? I think it vastly affects when we see shifts of consciousness.
Yep, absolutely.
And so all these types of tables that I'm producing, I'm actually going to put them into one paper for us to have as a reference. Then it'll have all the citations. That's the neat thing about using the footnotes in Google Docs. When I copy the little footnote, it copies the actual footnote all the way over too. So we'll have a paper. I'll put one together. I'm working on a few different projects. The abandoned stellar fusion model, that's going to take a while, and if anybody's interested in that paper, so what happened was there was a Sapphire video. I don't know if anybody remembers. There's a trailer, and it has the list of all the problems with the stellar fusion model.
Right.
So Michael and I, we looked at that list, and then I've made an entire, it's like going to be document that's going to go through each of those. And so there's going to be a lot. That's probably going to be a paper that has 1,000 citations. Let's hope, because starting at at spectroscopy in the 1800s and going forward. And why do I do this? So that we have things for quote arguing or debating, so that it isn't just them calling us a cult or something. That it's actually a paper.
Right.
Heresy. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe
tinfoil hat.
I have shut down a number of people on mainstream YouTube channels that they immediately jump into the old hat. They've not found electricity in space, blah blah blah, and using the Electric Universe Gateway or using these papers, these tables. The conversation ends really quickly when they see that I'm citing papers off ArXiv and ResearchGate or Nature.com, etc. So I'm empowering us with these tools.
Yeah.
So it gives a chronological consequence. I have even a map that I've created called the Giants of Electromagnetism, and I'm going to try and it's a Google map just so that we can have a context of where these people were, because I think their ability to even talk to each other, not just in language but in their physical place in the world. In the time that they were alive, I think it affects how we understand what the paradigm, how it went towards one versus going towards the other. It's certainly very important that Poincaré died just prior to Einstein getting the Nobel for the photoelectric effect. That's a important thing.
There's a big shift that happened. In my impression, right around there's a big shift that happened.
Yeah, that is incredibly important period there, that 1905, where the Birkeland currents and everything, all of that was happening. But then you see, it's the students of the students, it's at least their students mostly. I mean, Einstein does have a few things he did later on, but let's be honest, it was mostly Bose, and they're doing things down there in the 20s and 30s. But this period of time between 1897 and 19,
he was elevated. He was elevated into a religious figure, ultimately, to me, in my opinion.
Yeah, more or less. And you look at Big Bang cosmology and plasma cosmology dating to the same year in terms of the official, when they're actually becoming their own cosmology. And so the question is, what happened? We can deconstruct that all we want. But,
right.
So all these are tools that I'm putting out there so that we can.
That's awesome. I mean, it's right along the lines of, at least we've started out just a ragtag crew, and it's like this is pretty clearly the message and the mission statement of what we're about. So it's really exciting to see you document it so well here. And then
thank you. I mean, it was a lot of hard work. Again, that plasma glyph paper was over a year, mostly because a lot of that time was me spent going, well, now what? Because the classical model wasn't going to work well enough to be precise, even with all the assumptions, precise enough. But once you have it and the magnetic hydrodynamic calculations of Io Jupiter, and now you have Peratt's own calculations. We're getting a basic range of where these thunderbolts were in power, and it's starting at the minimum at the H-bomb and going up, 1,000 times of that.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking unbelievable type power, and then when you add the step potential model in there, it explains the selectivity. In the paper, I took some time to debunk the Carolina Bays, so that I'm not saying there weren't any comets. I'm not saying there weren't any impacts at Greenland. In fact, I think that obviously that played a part, but that something was being dragged in and it had things with it, and it brought devastation that rained down from above, hence the dolmens. And all of this, really, it's the saying that I have, the truth is in the middle and off to the side a bit. We've got to start seeing how things are compounded together, and it's not this or that, but it's a combination of them. And I go through that in the paper as to why it's not only starvation or only warfare or only comets or disease. It's that all of these things are happening together. But the mechanism that nobody had mentioned before specifically is step potential. And to me, that's the missing thing. And there's a paper that Randall Carlson had given to me, where it shows that the spherals that they're finding are definitely not terrestrial lightning. Well, my immediate response is, well, then it's extraterrestrial lightning, because it can't be only the impacts. There has to be something else going on as well, because we're seeing spherules that are very clearly electrical. And I do cite, of course, Jupp in here. It's a huge list of people that are cited at the end of the plasma glyphs paper. Is it too much? Possibly. But at least, though, my ideal with EPMC is that people can deconstruct and do whatever they want with it, as long as they're citing their work and they're not being ridiculous. Just don't go willy-nilly introducing aliens. I even made a paper just to deal with the ancient alien hypothesis versus, and even Chinese sciences versus, to see where there's overlap, because we do have to be a little exclusionary. But if people have evidence, I think we can get a lot in within plasma electromagnetic cosmology.
Right.
A lot.
The goal is finding that unbroken chain of comparison, and it's like, and once you find that, you have legs to run with, But it's like when they're not there, then it can be a serious hindrance.
Yes, I completely agree that we're setting ourselves free from shackles. And I mean, I went to electrical engineering school. They didn't mention plasma in any of those classes.
I've got the same background. I'm an electrical engineer and computer engineer, and it's like that. But I look at this material. It's like, why was I never exposed to this with all the stuff that we have to go through to do it? It's like, why? Just basic stuff like. Here's an anode action like Lichtenberg was doing in the 1700s. Like, this is what an anode action looks like. This is what a cathode action looks like. It's like, why did I not see that when I went through electrical engineering school?
Exactly. I think the answer is they didn't
technical school. So we were doing a lot more constructing with the forces, like manually, like basically, build take the two wires, build a loop, and then show the right-hand rule. Try to make aluminum respond to magnetism.
Right.
Those type of things. And you were like, what?
Yeah.
How can that happen? Turn magnetism at right angles. Watch how it doesn't affect anything. And then you were like, oh, so we can put these two transformers near each other and they won't affect each other because they're at right angles? Yes. Oh, right. Shit.
These separations but this is the silification, the over specialization that we've been exposed to.
Well, engineering is one thing, but then there's actually building within the confines of reality that you had to. So granted, a doctorate like Don Scott might be absolutely amazing and know way more. But there is the fundamentals of trying to make sure that these work together in the real world. And usually a technologist can adapt that. But, like you said, there's...
Good point.
There's...
there's something for everyone. So there's something for the pragmatists. There's something for the theoretical physicists, because they clearly want to do unicorns and fairies. Well, let's give them unicorns and fairies to tell them where those came from.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Let's give them dragons. Right. They want dragons clearly because Game of Thrones is incredibly popular. I have an entire paper that is
dedicated to Games of Thrones.
No, it's dedicated to the investments in Ragnarok. It's how much money we've spent on Into the World Media and on nuclear weapons. It's both depressing and it's sobering, because it's clear that we need, and that's why I wrote the new paper, the parameterizations of new religion. It's clear that we're not going to move past that without dealing with the psychology of the issue.
Right.
And we have to
That's
really...
very Velikovskian right there.
Yes, it is. But again, when you look at the Ferris wheels paper, go to the next tab over. Go to the next tab over there. And we'll just scroll through the motifs, and you'll see them, and some of them I'm like, is this purposeful? Do they know what they're doing? Of course, that's Coney Island.
Yeah, no.
Now look at the second one there. Look at the rotating crescent. Now, did they know that when they made Coney Island? And you have the central star, the yin yang. Let's see here. Keep going. Spiral. Yeah, the Wonder Wheel. And I'm comparing that with one of the mound sites in Kentucky. This is in Cincinnati. The smile motif is right in the center. And why was that shirt so popular, for God's sakes? Because if you look, these glyphs, the smile face glyph is kind of a flat smile. It's all over. There was even in Cincinnati Museum of Art, they did the Chinese, the terracotta warriors. and there was a man riding a horse, and he had a flat face with that exact that exact smile that's out of Dave's book.
Well, that would horrify me if I was being attacked by samurai and some guy with a smiley face came at me. I was like, okay, I'm done.
Right, but of course, the archaeologist's intention was that it was an actual, a figurine, and I think it was, of course, a motif that they were making, the horse and the smiley face and everything. And
in fact, the reason we don't even understand the motif is because we became the motif when we put these headdresses on. A lot of the times we put the headdress of the native on our head, with the feathers and everything, and then our face would be the smiley face, and we would paint it up like a clown. Exactly.
Yeah. Go back up there to the not that one. Keep going to the Saturn ride. I mean, look at this company, Zamparella. Look at the both of these rides. They made both of these. You've got the cosmic pole and the cosmic sun with the crescent on the right side, and people are nearly dying. Then on here, they've got the Saturn, right, and you're riding in the Paradise Island. You're riding in the floating city in the sky, and then you're going through a crescent boat. And now, if Zamparella doesn't know that they're doing it, how did they do it? And I don't know if they know, but they named one the Cyclops. So, they may be reaching into because they're an Italian company, they may be reaching into the Roman history. But how did they know it would be a popular ride? How did they know that it would be something that people want to ride over and over again? This is not a mistake.
What's it come from that whole act of doing it? Sometimes it's like it's coming through like a larger consciousness kind of thing. Right,
and it happened. It's almost as soon as we had electromagnetism. This is before we had even the electron. They were inventing the Ferris wheel. Came before the electron. And why did people immediately use the power, the force, the unified force, whatever you want to call it, the ether, to immediately create this cathartic experience of these amusement parks? Because they created a floating city in the sky, in the dark, right, of the waters, and then they had this giant wheel that they would go, and it's a form of it's a subconscious worship. They didn't know that they were doing it. And then, of course, I go on to why we put children onto dragons, the protection of innocence. It's in all the common movie themes. I even include a few. Funny little thing about if you scroll down, I'm real funny like this. Keep going down. If you open up the Google Doc, the Spirited Away one actually moves. It's an animated GIF, so I always I try to put Easter eggs for people who follow the the Google Doc.
I'm not sure where I see the Google Doc.
No, it's okay. I do funny things like that. Like
nice, little Easter eggs.
Yeah, in the magnetic universe. Do you remember when MMS came back with the magnetic ropes just outside the Earth's atmosphere, and they had that beautiful GIF that flowed around. I went ahead and stuck that in the paper, so in the Google Doc it actually moves.
Nice.
You gotta figure you gotta have fun with these things.
Yeah. Oh, they have these Jupiter documents out. I mean, interesting tie in there that you can embed. Like pretty nice HTML5 and JavaScript stuff.
I did actually put one of I think it was Jupiter. I can't remember which one, but the storms they actually move in the Google Doc, so that people can see it.
Right.
Just for fun. They can't do it for academia.edu or ResearchGate, but
right. They're trying to get it so it's accepted within formal papers, etc. So that's at least what the goal of the Jupiter formatting is. So anyway, as a side note.
So that's pretty much where I'm at with it. There's a lot of little projects going on. It's an open format cosmology framework. I created a paper that's like top 10 reasons to switch. Of course, that was aimed at Big Bang cosmologists, right? Because and I put in some reasons that they should consider switching to our cosmology. And then I included a tool work. This came up in a conversation Neil and I were having with Rick. That we have to start protecting also because I predicted, and I have a paper called The Predictable Rise of Charged Dark Matter, in which I have predicted that they're going to switch because their tools are proving us correct. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but they're doing it.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And so they are going to try and take credit, and I want to hold them accountable, and to give credit to the people who deserve it, whether it's Ralph Jurgens or Dave Talbot or Walt Thornhill or Irving
that
Langmuir,
might be
whatever.
harder. Irving Langmuir
Might
be
be
easier
harder.
because you're in the plasma cosmology
Right.
realm. But if you go to Velikovsky realm, you're going to just get a fight. I think we should sneak that in on the ass end.
That's exactly what I intend to do. Is it's like when what was it, NASA? I guess, or one of the teams that's associated with NASA, and they came out with the same model as Donald Scott, and I'm going, well, they need to reference him, in my opinion, because these coaxial jets coming from the active galactic nuclei, which not all of them are even on that page, right? There's still.
Right.
There's still some of them are calling them all sorts of things, and there's bubbles.
It's very interesting, this dynamic that's appearing here, where they're kind of admitting that they were looking at it wrongly, but we have the answer and it came from us, And
I'm
seeing this quite a bit.
Well, it came from you guys. I'm the latecomer who is now putting tools together to show, and then I've got some ideas, so I put those into paper form and present my ideas. But they're open source. So like if you in the plasma, if you take the spreadsheet and you come up with different calculations and everything, debunk me. Put out a paper.
Yeah.
The
dynamic has changed radically just because of the ability to cross-reference, unlike ever, and
yes.
And the ability to get stuff out, immediately, that never existed before, and it's a really profound shift.
I would prefer that you all do get more precise and that you eliminate some of my assumptions. I would prefer that you find errors in the calculations. I would prefer that you come up with better models and that you shred it to pieces, because if that happens, we get more precise and we get get stronger as a community.
Absolutely,
because culture is good. But what we definitely need is the concreteness. I'm not saying that peer-reviewed journalism is the right way to go, but it's some form of peer review. Even the Chinese had peer review. It's just usually had one had already died, and so somebody else would come along and shred them to pieces, and that's how Chinese medicine progressed, and it took a long time. For example, cold and flu theory lasted for hundreds of years. It was only because of the epidemics of like smallpox and et cetera in the Middle Ages that somebody said, hey, maybe we shouldn't use hot herbs, maybe we should use cool herbs, and that was a fight then for another 200 years, and it just kept going like that. So the quicker that we have that interaction, that dynamic, the less that we look like any kind of cult or something like that, and then B, we actually will create a stronger reed boat that can withstand any kind of flood of data. That is like quote toppling. For example, I did one on the Bose-Einstein condensates, and I showed, hey, we've got ultra cold plasmas, and when it comes to condensed matter, we have crystal plasmas. Now, none of us, I mean, maybe you all do, maybe Eugene knows. I don't know the first thing about crystal plasmas. I don't know the first thing about ultra cold plasmas except for what I studied when I was comparing with Bose-Einstein condensate cosmology. But if we have all these things in plasma physics, we need to bring them to bear. We can't only talk about arc discharge or only talk about crater rim formations. We got to go the whole gamut and show them, yeah, we've got this stuff over here. And also, you don't have to resort to things like negative mass or dark photons, which whatever that would mean, to create. I mean, it's a unicorn that was birthed out of a unicorn, and we don't need that. We've got all the better tools, in my opinion. So when I said about making EPMC, right from the get-go, I engineered it to be diverse, the E being extended. So you want to talk about religion, you want to talk about diffusionism and Giza power plants, all of it sounds amazing.
Right.
And no one owns it. So it's a thing we can everybody.
It's how do you open it? How do you open up the dialogue and get it something that will be entertained by a large group of people?
Yeah.
This is the challenge.
Yeah. Well, I've been using ResearchGate and academia.edu. Academia.edu has its detractions and detractors, and it has its positives. ResearchGate, I think, is and I'm sure Eugene will agree, is a little bit more of a. It's harder to get an account there, and you have to work. You have to care more about the science. So I only put some of the papers up on ResearchGate. I don't put all of the EPMC stuff up on there. I stick to like my clinical electric field measurements in clinic. If you guys want to even talk about that today, I don't know. But I put that stuff there, and I put like the pyramids conjunctions, because that's all hard data. And hard data, even if that table I showed you here is hard data, it's still it's got our bent on it. So I try to be more conducive to the mainstream community on ResearchGate, whereas on academia, that's where I put all of our weird ideas, and we can go back and forth and citing each other and create our own peer review process. Because why not? Why not? We have intelligence. I mean, there's more IQ in this group that you all have created. To me, I think you all are at the forefront.
Oh man, thanks.
I'm 100%.
It's totally organic. That's the beautiful part of it.
That's
really.
why I like it a lot. There's no one really in control. I mean, Neil's is guiding, but it's such a unique thing to create a community where that happens. Right. On the other hand, creating the rigor, yin and yang, we can't only be culture, and so I want to encourage whoever's reading, listening, whoever it is, to join in the so-called the fray or the battle. Or if like Jason Gable, he's doing these awesome experiments. I was talking with him about the slow motion camera work and the plasma filaments. Even warp perception. This guy, he's not in our community at all, but he did something that can help us, because the slow motion of the slow motion showed things about plasma that didn't make any sense to me, and that data needs to be captured, which is why I created the Electric Universe Gateway in the first place, because the EU Gateway is searchable. Now, right now, it's a Google site, and when that goes away, I've already got somebody lined up who will host and keep that website growing. And it's got all you guys and its tools and its links, and I got a primer, and this is so that we can quickly cite everything we say quickly. One search, search, boom, you find, again, like Bagashoff, you find something he said or a talk that he gave, and you can quickly link that to not a disbeliever, what's the right word? A doubter, a skeptic, and it opens up the dialogue. Right? Yeah. It opens up the dialogue in a constructive way, instead of, because what I see on the YouTube a lot is everybody just argues about how right they are.
Right.
And we got to do better than that. I think if we want to win, I think we got to do better than that.
Right. Definitely. I think, and a lot of it is just the passion. The passion comes. It's contagious. I've shared it. The one thing that I see is a gateway for people who have not been exposed to it all is electric geology. And what we see, and it's like they see that, and then just within like 2 or 3 sentences with a pointed statement, they're like their jaw drops. And I've seen this a number of times, and it's like to me that's the start. That's the avenue in.
Yeah, and Andy Hall's video, that presentation he did with the arc blasted Earth, is my favorite presentation, because outside of, say, the Mars documentary. And it's because it is so obvious and visual that even, my father-in-law, he's a respiratory therapist, but he can see it and understand generally just, the gist of these triangles. They can't form themselves, and it's not water. So what is it? The more we can do that, even electrometeorology. And it's funny because meteorology has already been electric, but it's just they didn't realize how important it was. And so talking about these Earth spots and solar forcing is so important for us going forward. We probably won't get to the clinical electric fields today.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately I have a project I'm working on, so I need to kind of get off now. But it was what a great pleasure. This is for me. This is one of the very top interviews that we've done and guests. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I can hang on. And anybody that wants to stay and talk and ask questions or provide criticisms, I'm open to that. Until my wife and kids and everybody gets here. And I just thank you all for going through the plasma glyphs paper. I look forward to us talking about.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it again soon. I love it.
The bioenergy work, the charge distributive networks. And then I got even a science fiction for us to do sometime. I call it the Birkeland polyphase superweb. And so, yeah, that
sounds exciting.
It's really exciting, and so it's always there's always going to be something new and of interest to talk about, and I do have a lot of passion, and I hope that it sparks some passion in anybody that could be listening if this makes the edit. That it is to me. It brought me back because I did not really like electrical engineering towards the end of my career. I got into martial arts and stuff. I don't even like computers because I think that they've been engineered the wrong direction. They've gotten worse, in my opinion. And so, this electric universe recaptured in me, that pursuit of the wizard path from the European side, from this cultural
childlike wonder, and I had to go to the Chinese and the Hindus to really get that before, and that's not really fair. We have that in our cultural history, and it's nice to open it back up for people. It was burned; they burned it out of our culture in many ways. That's right. It's a travesty as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the whole reason King Arthur and them left Wales is that the entire continent, apparently, of England caught fire, and they could see it in France. But you can't talk about it. Why can't we talk about it?
Was this 535?
Yeah. And it was a very powerful event that was also recorded in Bolivia. So why are we not able to talk about that? It's what's moved the world, these catastrophes and these events. It's inspired religion and inspired war and inspired medicine, and I think that it will work. Of course, I'm working to see if there's a connection between the discovery of electricity and improvements in standards of living in the West, like literally proving that the economy is somehow powered or related. So far, I have to say the fiat model more explains it, but I'm trying to find a connection, that, especially in the 1800s data, between when they start making these discoveries and they enter the public space and how well people live, because I think that there is not an accidental correlation between the industrial age and the change of consciousness that the Enlightenment brought about, because the Enlightenment was, of course, before that, but it extended into this change. And what can we do in the future? We can create something really magical, I think.